It is June 13th, 2025. Yellowwater, Benue State, Nigeria. A mission compound sits in the darkness. Inside, over 400 people are sleeping. Most of them are internally displaced, refugees in their own country. They fled here because their villages were destroyed, because their farms were burned, because men with guns came in the night. They came to this place, St. Joseph Catholic Church Mission, because they believed it was safe here. At approximately 10 p.m., the attackers arrived. Witnesses will later say there were dozens of them, armed with AK-47s, some carrying machetes. They surrounded the compound on all sides. They chanted Allahu Akbar as they opened fire. The people inside ran. Some hid in the church. Others tried to escape into the bush. Children screamed for their parents in the darkness.
There they slaughtered more than 100 persons. The incidents lasted for more than 5 hours.
Father Nkuma Jonathan, the parish priest, he was there. He survived. Later, he would describe what he saw. They set buildings on fire, he said. The mutilated bodies. Some victims were trapped in their homes and burned alive. When the sun rose on June 14th, the mission compound was in ruins. Bodies lay scattered across the grounds. The church, where people had sought sanctuary, was damaged by bullets and fire. The official death toll was uncertain. Initial reports said 100, then 150. Church sources eventually confirmed over 250 people were killed that night. 250 human beings. Mothers, fathers, children, entire families erased in a single night of violence.
Yeah, my family members affected, they are 5 in numbers. My wife, brother, and 4 children.
September 26, 2025. Los Angeles, California. 3 months later, 7,000 miles away, a comedian sits behind the desk. Bela, host of one of America's most watched political talk shows, is known for being provocative, atheist, liberal, not someone you'd expect to champion Christian causes. But on this night, Meha does something unexpected. He admits he's not a Christian, but he could no longer watch in silence as they are systematically killing the Christians in Nigeria.
I'm not a Christian, but they are systematically killing the Christians in Nigeria. They are literally attempting to wipe out the Christian population of an entire country.
The studio audience is silent. They have killed over 100,000 since 2009, Meha claims.
They've burned 18,000 churches. This is so much more. These are their Islamists, Boko Haram. This is so much more of a genocide attempt than what is going on in Gaza.
Within hours, the clip is everywhere. Conservative news outlets amplify it. Religious networks share it. Social media explodes with outrage and solidarity. Hashtag Nigerian Christians trend worldwide. A genocide that the world has ignored. Christians have been slaughtered for their faith. The deadliest place in the world to be a Christian. All of this trending on the social media. September 2025, on the US Senate floor, Senator Ted Cruz of Texas stands before the chamber. Since 2009, he declares, approximately 50,000 Nigerian Christians have been killed, 2,000 schools destroyed, 18,000 churches burned by Islamist militant groups. He introduces Senate Bill 2747, the Nigeria Religious Freedom Accountability Act of 2025. This bill would force the US government to designate Nigeria as, quote, a country of particular concern for severe violations of religious freedom. It would impose targeted sanctions on Nigerian officials. It would mandate action. And then October 2025, Fox and Friends morning show. Congressman Riley Moore appears on television. Behind him, graphics display the same numbers. 50,000 killed, 18,000 churches burned. Nigeria has become the deadliest place in the world to be a Christian. Moore says, we must suspend all US arms sales until the Nigerian government protects religious minorities.
This is a genocide that's been going on by Islamic terrorist organizations, and we're going to get right to work on this and get to the bottom of what's happening.
October 15th, 2025. Nina Sher of the Hudson Institute organizes a letter signed by 30 Christian leaders. They were former ambassadors, bishops, evangelical leaders. They cite Bill Maher's comments as evidence of bipartisan concern. Even those outside our faith the right, recognize the atrocity of what is happening in Nigeria. The letter urges immediate resignation, immediate action, immediate intervention within weeks. The narrative is everywhere. A genocide is happening in Nigeria. Christians are being systematically exterminated by Muslim extremists. The world is ignoring it. America must act. It's a story that makes sense. Good versus evil, persecuted believers versus jihadist killers. A moral crisis demanding moral response. But there's only one problem. What if this story you are being told isn't the whole story? Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation, 220 million people, the continent's largest economy, a country split almost evenly, roughly half Christian, half Muslim. And yes, Nigeria is bleeding. Since 2009, tens of thousands have died. Villages have been razed, churches and mosques destroyed, entire communities displaced. The violence is real, the suffering is undeniable. But here's what the headlines don't tell you. This isn't one war. It's 3 different wars happening simultaneously in different parts of the country, each with different perpetrators, different victims, and different causes. In the Northeast, Islamist terrorists wage an insurgency, but their victims are overwhelmingly Muslim civilians, not only Christians. In the Middle Belt, farmers and herders clash over scarce land and water, a conflict driven in part by resource scarcity, albeit with ethnic undertones. In the Northwest, armed bandits kidnap for ransom and slaughter villagers, killing Christians and Muslims indiscriminately for profit, not faith. And beneath it all lies a question that should make everyone pause. This violence has existed for 15 years. Boko Haram emerged in 2009. The massacres began over a decade ago. International organizations have documented the crisis for years. So, my question is, why now? Why in September 2025 does Nigeria suddenly become the center of American political attention? Why do senators introduce legislation? Why do talk show hosts sound the alarm? Why does a coordinated campaign emerge all at once, calling for US intervention? The answer, as you will see, has less to do with protecting Nigerian lives and more to do with who stands to benefit from framing this complex crisis in simple terms. Because when you follow the money, when you follow the power, follow the players pushing this narrative, you find something troubling. A network of politicians, think tanks, advocacy groups, and private military contractors, all with something to gain from American involvement in Nigeria, all with a track record of similar campaigns in Iraq, Libya, and Afghanistan, all telling a story that serves their interest while ignoring the voices of Nigerians themselves, both Christians and Muslims, who are begging the world to understand what is really happening here. This is the story of who is really dying in Nigeria, who is doing the killing, and who wants America to believe it's something it is not. Now let's pause here for a moment. There's an important message I need to deliver to you watching this video. While we're in the post-production phase of this 2-part series, the White House gave a press release stating President Trump has in fact designated Nigeria as a country of particular concern. That means some of the things we assumed were going to happen have already happened. However, I still believe the information is necessary to put out there, which is why we are still posting this. Also, I want you to understand that this video has been the result of rigorous investigation, and everything I present to you here in this 2-part series is based on facts alone. Facts that will not necessarily support some of the narratives flying around. I've tried to be as neutral as possible while citing my sources so that you can do your own independent verification. Now, while I appreciate the controversial nature of this topic, I plead with you that you consider the facts I'm about to present to you and then make your own conclusions from those. Now, with that said, let's jump right back in. Let's start with what we know for a fact. It is good to establish that people are indeed dying in Nigeria. The question is, how many and who? The numbers you hear depend on who is counting. a Christian advocacy organization, publishes an annual World Watch list ranking countries where Christians face persecution. In their 2025 report, they claim that in just the first 220 days of the year, more than 7,000 Christians were killed in Nigeria. That's an average of 32 deaths per day. Insta Society, a Catholic-inspired Nigerian NGO, goes even further. According to their October 2025 report, between 2010 and October 2025, a span of 15 years, approximately 185,000 people have been killed in Nigeria's religious violence. Of those, they estimate 125,000 were Christians and 60,000 were non-violent Muslims. The same report claims 19,100 churches were destroyed, 1,100 Christian communities were displaced, and over 600 Christian clerics were abducted, including 250 Catholic priests and 350 pastors. Senator Ted Cruz, in his legislation and public statements, cites a figure of 50,000 Christians killed since 2009, with 18,000 churches destroyed. Bela claimed 100,000 Christians killed, also with 18,000 churches burned. These are the numbers driving the American narrative. Quite staggering, horrifying. Numbers that demand action, no doubt. But there's another set of numbers, and they tell a whole different story. There's an organization called the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, known as ACLED. This is an independent crisis mapping organization that tracks political violence and protest worldwide. Their data is often used by the United Nations, the US State Department, and major human rights organizations. They appear not to have a political agenda. They simply document violence as it happens, using verified reports from the ground. So, between January 2020 and September 2025, ACLED documented every attack against civilians in Nigeria. Total civilian deaths were recorded to be 20,409 in total attacks, which were 11,862. Now, here's what matters. Of those 11,862 attacks, ACLED identified 385 as targeted events against Christians, where Christian identity of the victim was a reported factor. Those 385 attacks resulted in 317 deaths. During the same period, ACLED documented 196 attacks specifically targeting Muslims, resulting in 417 deaths. In attacks explicitly motivated by religious identity, more Muslims died than Christians, that is 417 versus 317, even though there were fewer attacks against Muslims. This doesn't mean Christian suffering is insignificant. 317 people dead because of their faith is a tragedy. But it means something critical. The vast majority of Nigeria's violence, that is over 19,000 deaths, cannot be categorized as religiously motivated. The violence is real, the scale is massive, but the Christian genocide framing doesn't match the data. So, where do the higher numbers come from? Let's look at the methodology because this matters a lot. Organizations like Open Doors and Insta Society appear to count all violence that occurs in Christian majority areas as religious persecution. If a Christian farmer is killed in a land dispute with a Muslim herder, it is coded as anti-Christian violence. If bandits attack a predominantly Christian village, those deaths are attributed to religious persecution. Meanwhile, ACLED's methodology seems to be more precise here. They only code an attack as religiously motivated if the perpetrators explicitly targeted victims based on faith, or if the attack occurred in a religious context, meaning like bombing a church during a mass or attacking a mosque during prayers. This distinction can be everything, because if you count all violence in Christian majority areas as Christian persecution, you arrive at numbers in the tens of thousands. But if you count only violence explicitly motivated by religious identity, the numbers drop dramatically here. Both methods document real deaths. Both capture real suffering, but only one tells you whether religion is the primary driver of violence or just one factor amongst many. The US State Department, in its 2022 Religious Freedom Report on Nigeria, noted something quite crucial. It says violence affects both Christians and Muslims. The report went on to explain that issues of religion, ethnicity, land and resource competition, and criminality are often closely linked, making it quite difficult to categorize many incidents as targeting individuals because of their religious identity. In other words, Nigeria's violence is complex. Religion plays a role, no doubt, but so does ethnicity, so does resource scarcity, so does competition for land and water, so does criminal enterprise. When you reduce this complexity to a simple story, Muslims killing Christians or Christians killing Muslims, you miss what's actually happening on the ground and you miss who else is dying. Now, to understand Nigeria's situation, we need to look at its geography and how it is fueling different conflicts. Nigeria is roughly the size of Texas and California combined. It stretches from the Sahara Desert in the north to the tropical forest and oil-rich delta in the south. These different regions face entirely different conflicts. The violence isn't one war, it is three in fact. The first war being the one waged by Boko Haram in the northeast. In 2002, a radical preacher named Mohammed Yusuf founded a movement in Maiduguri, Borno State. The group became known as Boko Haram, loosely translated as Western education is forbidden. This is their official name, I don't want to try to pronounce this. This translates to people committed to the propagation of the Prophet's teaching and jihad. Their goal was quite simple and clear: to establish an Islamic caliphate governed by strict Sharia law. In 2009, clashes with Nigerian security forces killed hundreds, including Yusuf himself, who was reportedly killed in custody. The group went underground, then re-emerged with a vengeance. They bombed police stations, attacked military barracks, assassinated government officials, and yes, they targeted Christians. In fact, on December 25, 2011, Christmas Day, Boko Haram bombed St. Teresa Catholic Church in Madala, near the capital of Abuja. At least 37 people died in that attack. It was the first in a series of church bombings that would terrorize Christian communities across the northeast. And then in April 2014, Boko Haram kidnapped 276 schoolgirls from their dormitory in Chibok, Borno State. The girls were predominantly Christians, though some were Muslims. They were taken into the Sambisa forest. Some were forced into marriage, some were raped, some were alleged to have been killed in Nigerian military airstrikes targeting Boko Haram camps. The Bring Back Our Girls campaign went global. The world watched, and for many, Chibok became proof of Boko Haram's war on Christians. But here's what the headlines missed. Boko Haram operates primarily in Nigeria's northeast, Borno, Yobe, and Adamawa states. These states are overwhelmingly Muslim. According to the 2006 census, Borno State is 96% Muslim, Yobe is 95% Muslim, and Boko Haram has killed Muslims there by the thousands. On November 28, 2014, Boko Haram bombed the Kano Central Mosque, one of the largest mosques in northern Nigeria. The attack occurred during Friday prayers. At least 120 Muslims died that day. Hundreds more were wounded. So, why would Boko Haram bomb a mosque? Because in their ideology, any Muslim who doesn't support their version of an Islamic state is an apostate. Nigerian soldiers were considered as apostates. Government officials are apostates. Muslim clerics who preach coexistence are apostates. All of them are legitimate targets for these guys. According to ACLED's findings, more Muslims than Christians were recorded killed in religion-targeted incidents between 2020 and 2025. In 2015, Boko Haram split. The more extreme faction aligned with ISIS and became known as Islamic State West African Province, that is ISWAP. Now, while Boko Haram targets both Christian and Muslim civilians, ISWAP focuses more on government forces and infrastructures. Both groups continue to operate to this day. Both continue to kill, and most of their victims are Muslims. This doesn't make Boko Haram's attacks on Christians any less horrific. The Chibok girls, the church bombings, the targeted killings of Christian farmers, all of it is real. But the narrative that Boko Haram exists solely to exterminate Christians ignores the thousands of Muslim civilians they have killed, the mosques they have destroyed, the Muslim clerics they have executed. It's not a war on Christians. It's a war on everyone who doesn't submit to their version of Islam. And then there is the second war, Fulani militias in the Middle Belt. When you move south from Boko Haram territory and you enter Nigeria's Middle Belt, states like Benue, Plateau, Nasarawa and Kaduna, this is where the second war is happening. The Fulanis are one of the largest ethnic groups in Africa. Traditionally, they are pastoral nomads, meaning herders who move their cattle across West Africa in search of grazing land. For centuries, they coexisted with farming communities through negotiated arrangements. Farmers would allow herds to graze on harvested fields in exchange for manure fertilizer. The system worked because land was abundant and populations were smaller then. Well, not anymore. The Sahara Desert is expanding. Lake Chad, which in 1963 covered 25,000 square kilometers, had shrunk to just about 1,500 square kilometers by 2019. Desertification pushes herders south in search of water and grass. Population growth means less land per person. Climate change brings more drought and more failed harvest. Traditional grazing routes no longer exist. Farmers have settled on lands that herders once used. When herds trample crops, farmers retaliate. When farmers block migration routes, herders fight back. What began as disputes escalated into something deadlier. Between 2015 and 2022, farmer-herder clashes killed over 23,000 people. The International Crisis Group found that in the first half of 2018 alone, these conflicts killed at least 1,300 people, 6 times more than Boko Haram killed during the same period. And here's where religion enters the picture. The Fulani herders are predominantly Muslim. The farming communities in the Middle Belt are predominantly Christian. So, when violence erupts, it takes on a religious dimension. But when you look at the facts, is it fundamentally about religion? Bishop Wilfred Chikpa Anagbe of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Makurdi calls it nothing short of a jihad clothed in many names: terrorism, kidnappings, killer headsmen, banditry. His diocese has seen horrific violence. In April 2018, armed men attacked churches in Benue State during morning mass, killing at least 19 worshippers, including 2 priests. The attacks were systematic, coordinated, brutal. Father Okuma Jonathan, the same priest who survived the Yellowater massacre, described what he sees. The Fulani come with their cattle and take over farmland and kill anyone who puts up resistance. From his perspective, from the perspective of Christian communities watching their villages burn, this feels like religious persecution. And the pain is real, the trauma is real, the pattern of attacks on Christian farming communities is real. But here is then the complexity.
Hey you guys, please stop spoiling Fulani's name. Fulanis are not a bandit. Fulanis, we are not a bandit. Bandits are different, well, Fulanis are different.
Baba Othman Ngezama is a Fulani community leader. In June 2025, after the Yellowater massacre, he told the BBC that, quote, "Our people are not behind the Benue killings. We recognize that there are unresolved issues in Benue that have persisted for some time. However, we have never permitted any of our members to attack or harm others." Many Fulani leaders have condemned the violence. Some Fulani communities have been attacked by bandits themselves. And in some areas, Christian militias have retaliated against Fulani communities, killing herders, burning camps, destroying cattle. The violence has become cyclical, and there are some rogue leaders supporting all of this. Revenge begets revenge. Each side sees itself as defending against the other's aggression. The International Crisis Group's investigation concluded that rather than religious beliefs, intercommunal violence is largely driven by insecurity and a lack of trust between ethno-religious groups competing for political power and control over natural resources. In other words, it's about land, water, survival, and political power. You see, in Africa, religion is the lens through which communities see each other, but it is not the cause. The Plateau State massacres of 2025 illustrates this perfectly.
I am not happy. Women are becoming widows. Children are becoming orphans.
Between March 28th and April 7th, armed herders attacked 5 Christian farming communities: Darfur, Gwande, Houthi, Manguna, and Rowe. More than 50 people were killed. On April 7th, gunmen stormed Bokos district, killing 52 people in a single night. But during the same period, in Zamfara state, a predominantly Muslim area, bandits attacked Muslim villages, killing dozens. Amnesty International documented what is happening across these regions.
As you could see, I'm standing here. This is my house in my village, and I lost everything that was in the house, both foodstuff, clothing, and whatever.
Between May 2023 and May 2025, Benue State recorded 6,896 deaths, Plateau State 2,630 deaths, Zamfara 273 deaths, Katsina 294 deaths. So across 7 northern states, at least 10,217 people were killed. Christians and Muslims, farmers and herders, men, women, and children. All victims of a crisis driven by resource scarcity, governance failure, and the breakdown of traditional conflict resolution. And then we move on to the war number 3, bandits in the northwest.
Da mun ce za a ba mu miliyan 300. Daga baya aka haɗa mu da wasu aka yi ta maganganu, shine dai suka ba da miliyan 60 aka sake su. Aka suka bayar.
This war is the simplest to understand, and it has nothing to do with religion either. In Nigeria's northwest, Zamfara, Katsina, Sokoto, and Kebbi states, armed criminal gangs control vast territories. They are called bandits. But that word doesn't capture what they have become. These are organized military forces with heavy weapons, motorcycles, and sophisticated logistics. They extort villages, kidnap for ransom, targeting anyone with money regardless of religion. They steal cattle, they rob travelers on highways. In June 2022, bandits attacked a mosque in Bokuyum, Zamfara state, killing 18 Muslim worshippers during Friday prayers. But why would they attack a mosque? Not ideology, not religious hatred. They did it for money. The village was late on extortion payments. The attack was a message. Between 2020 and 2025, bandits conducted thousands of kidnappings. They have abducted school children from dormitories, just like Boko Haram did. But they were motivated by ransom, not ideology. They have kidnapped entire wedding parties. They have stopped buses and taken every passenger. Christian, Muslim, it doesn't matter. If you can pay, they'll release you. That is if they choose. If you can't, they'll kill you. Amnesty International's data from Zamfara state between May 2023 and May 2025 documented 273 deaths, 467 abductions, mostly women and girls, 638 villages sacked, 725 villages under bandits' control. This is a criminal enterprise masquerading as insurgency. Some bandits claim to fight for Fulani rights or political grievances, but investigations show they are motivated by profit, not principle. The Nigerian government largely refers to this as banditry to distinguish it from Boko Haram's jihadist terrorism and the farmer herders conflicts. But in American media and advocacy networks, it all gets lumped together as Islamist violence, Fulani militants, Muslim extremists, and the thousands of Muslim victims disappear from the narrative. On August 11, 2025, Father Jonathan returned to the Yellow Water Mission. It was the site of the June massacre where 271 people had died. The community was trying to rebuild, but they didn't feel safe. People are traumatized. It's a horrific thing to happen, but nothing seems to be working security-wise. The security team isn't protecting them enough. This is the face of Nigeria's violence. real people, real communities, real grief.
This incident has been occurring since 14 years now. At the beginning of this crisis, they brought soldiers to us. So we were thinking the issue will go down.
Many Christian communities in parts of Nigeria have suffered severe attacks, and there seemed to be an existential threat. The Christian Association of Nigeria, the umbrella organization representing all Christian denominations, issued a statement in October 2025. They affirmed that many Christian communities in parts of Nigeria have suffered severe attacks and called for urgent protection. Their pain is valid, their experience is real, and their call for protection is legitimate. But here's what else the Christian Association of Nigeria said, which American advocates rarely mentioned. They acknowledged that Muslims have also been victims of terror. They called for unity between faiths. They stopped short of endorsing the word genocide because they know what many Nigerian Christians understand. But the American narrative obscures. Both communities are suffering. In November 2014, when Boko Haram bombed the Kano Central Mosque, 120 Muslims died. There were fathers going to Friday prayers. There were students memorizing the Quran. There were shopkeepers closing their stores to worship their God. And no international campaign formed around their deaths. No senators introduced legislation. No advocacy groups launched fundraising campaigns. And you know why? They died because Boko Haram considered them apostates. Violence in Nigeria does not exclusively target Christians. Foreign entities are attempting to exploit local crises. So the truth with all of this is, there is no Christian genocide in Nigeria. There is no Muslim genocide in Nigeria. What we have is a handful of savage terrorist militias killing Christians and Muslims alike. At least that is what the evidence points to. This doesn't mean the violence against Christians is insignificant. It means when Boko Haram attacks, they kill both Muslims and Christians. They are bandits attacking mosques as well as churches. And the question we're struggling to find answer to is, why is America suddenly interested? And why are they only interested in Christian victims? Now, let's look at the complexity of the whole situation. What is actually happening here? You see, the word genocide has legal meaning. According to Article 2 of the 1948 United Nations Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, the word is defined as acts committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group. Intent matters. Systematic planning matters. The goal of destroying a group, not just killing individuals, but destroying the group itself, matters. And this is not me saying it. This is the standard the international law uses, and it is deliberately high because calling something genocide triggers obligations. It requires intervention. It carries weight. So, does Nigerians' violence meet this definition? Some organizations say yes. Genocide Watch, founded by Gregory Stanton, places Nigeria at stage 9, extermination, and stage 10, denial, on their 10 stages of genocide model. In October 2025, Mike Arnold from Blanco City, Texas, presented findings from what he described as a multi-year investigation. Arnold said he had visited internally displaced persons camps undercover and documented what he called an established protocol used by Fulani militias, separating Christian and Muslim men and women, killing Christian men, forcing Muslim men to join them or die, and in some cases selling women into sexual slavery. Based on this, Arnold concluded that the campaign of violence and displacement in northern and middle belt Nigeria does indeed constitute a calculated, current, and long-running genocide against Christian communities. The Observatory for Religious Freedom in Africa and several Christian advocacy organizations have adopted the genocide designation as well. But most international bodies have not. The United Nations has not determined this is genocide. The International Criminal Court has not investigated it as genocide. In fact, the US Holocaust Memorial Museum's Early Warning Project explicitly states that, quote, "We do not see sufficient evidence that various armed groups are working in coordination as part of a campaign against Christians." The museum notes there are multiple mass killings happening in Nigeria. But coordination and intent, the hallmarks of genocide, are not evident. The US Commission on International Religious Freedom has recommended Nigeria's designation as a country of particular concern for religious freedom violations. But even this body's report notes that violence affects large numbers of Christians and Muslims in several states across Nigeria. USCIRF acknowledges what the data shows. Both communities are victims. The US State Department's 2022 Religious Freedom Report on Nigeria made this point explicitly. Nigeria is roughly evenly divided between Muslim and Christians. Violence affects both communities. Issues of religion, ethnicity, land and resource competition, and criminality are often closely linked, making it difficult to categorize many incidents as targeting individuals because of their religious identity. Terrorist groups target people of all faiths. Muslims, Christians, and those of no religion have all suffered at the hands of these criminals.
All the clergies, we are tired. It's better for me to be in police custody. It's better for me to be in army barrack in the cell than to be outside performing burial every day.
Well, let's go back to the ACLED data. Between January 2020 and September 2025, there were 20,409 total civilian deaths. 385 attacks specifically targeting Christians resulted in 317 deaths. 196 attacks specifically targeting Muslims resulted in 417 deaths. 19,775 deaths from attacks not specifically characterized by religious targeting. That means 97% of civilian deaths occurred in attacks where religion was not the primary or explicit motivation. Lad Sawat, a senior analyst with ACLED, assessed the situation this way. He said, although religion has been a factor in Nigeria's security crisis, its large population and vast geographic differences make it impossible to speak of religious violence as motivating all of the violence. This matters. Because if this is genocide, if the intent is to destroy Christians as a group, then the evidence should show systematic, coordinated targeting of Christians across the country by organized forces working toward that particular goal. Instead, what we have is an evidence that shows multiple different armed groups operating in different regions with different motivations. Boko Haram targets both Christians and Muslims based on their jihadist ideology. Armed Fulani militants clash with Christian farmers over land and resources. Bandits kill anyone they can extort or rob. Nigerian security forces kill civilians of both faiths through airstrikes and operations. There is no central coordination, no unified command, no systematic plan to eliminate Christians from Nigeria. There is, however, catastrophic violence. There is state failure. There is impunity. There are attacks on churches and targeted killings of Christians. But that is not the same as genocide. And here's why the distinction matters. When you call something genocide, you are making a specific claim that carries specific implications. You are saying the international community has a responsibility to protect. You are invoking the precedent of Rwanda, where 800,000 died while the world watched.
America, as a government, needs to get involved.
You are creating moral pressure for military intervention. That is exactly what is happening now in American political discourse. The genocide narrative isn't just about describing reality. It's about building the case for an intervention. And now, to understand why Nigeria is collapsing into violence, you need to look beyond religion. Start with the geography. The Sahel region, the belt of semi-arid land south of the Sahara, is experiencing desertification at an accelerating rate. Lake Chad, which 4 countries depend on for water and fishing, has lost 90% of its surface area since 1963. Rainfall patterns have become unpredictable. Drought lasts longer, and when rain comes, it comes in destructive floods. For the Fulani, who have herded cattle across West Africa for centuries, this is catastrophic. Traditional grazing lands are disappearing. Migration routes are blocked. water sources are drying up. So herders move south, into the Middle Belt, into areas where farmers have settled for centuries, and conflict erupts. Studies of farmer-herder violence consistently find that resource scarcity is a better predictor of conflict than religious variables. When land and water are abundant, communities seem to coexist fine. But when they are scarce, violence increases. The International Crisis Group documented this systematically. They found that conflicts intensified in years with less rainfall and increased crop failure. This isn't about Islam versus Christianity. It is about survival for these people. Then there is governance failure.
May their soul rest in peace. May God bring peace and joy to the people of Benue.
The Nigerian government has proven unable to provide security across its vast territory. Police are undermanned, underpaid, and often corrupt. The military, which we will examine in detail much later, has received billions in assistance but remains incompetent, unable to defeat Boko Haram after 16 years of trying and failing. When the state can't protect its people, they tend to protect themselves. We now have vigilante groups scattered everywhere. Ethnic militias arm themselves. Revenge killings become normalized, and once that cycle starts, it's almost impossible to stop. How about the judicial system? It offers no accountability. Between 2009 and 2018, Nigeria established more than 20 inquiries into military abuses, extrajudicial killings, and massacres. Well, according to human rights organizations, none appear to have made a dent in the prevailing culture of impunity. When soldiers kill civilians, as they routinely do in airstrikes and operations, they face no consequences. When militias massacre villages, prosecutions are rare. Even bandits kidnap for ransom. They often operate freely in territories they control. So, without accountability, violence becomes normalized. And then there's economic marginalization. This plays a role too. Nigeria is Africa's largest oil producer. The country generates billions in petroleum revenue, but that wealth is concentrated in the hands of political elites. The northern states where Boko Haram operates have the highest poverty rates in the country. Youth unemployment is staggering. Boko Haram and other armed groups recruit from population with no economic prospects. When you are 25 years old with no job, no education, and no future, a militia that pays you and gives you a sense of purpose becomes attractive. This is why terrorism thrives in failed states, not because of religious favor, but because of hopelessness. Political manipulation also fuels violence. Nigerian politics is deeply divided along regional, ethnic, and religious lines. Politicians exploit these divisions to mobilize support. They stoke fears. They reward loyalty along ethnic and religious lines. They use patronage systems that exclude outsiders. So, when political elites frame everything as Muslim versus Christians or Northerners versus Southerners, it makes compromise impossible. It turns every dispute into an existential threat, and violence becomes a tool for political control. Finally, there is the arms proliferation problem. When NATO intervened in Libya in 2011 and overthrew Muammar Gaddafi, the country's massive weapons stockpiles flooded into neighboring regions. Libyan arms dealers sold to anyone with cash. Weapons flowed across the Sahel into Mali, Niger, Chad, and Nigeria. Boko Haram's capability increased dramatically after 2011. Did you care to ask why? Suddenly, they had heavy machine guns, anti-aircraft weapons, and military-grade explosives. Nigerian officials often cite the post-Libya arms flood as a turning point in the insurgency. And they are not wrong. And it all adds up. Climate change pushing people into conflict over scarce resource, government failure to provide security or justice, economic hopelessness driving recruitment into armed groups. And then there's political manipulation stoking divisions, international interventions destabilizing the region and flooding it with weapons. Religion is part of the story, but it's just one factor amongst many. And here's the thing Nigerians, Christians, and Muslims both understand. The root causes won't be solved by framing this as a religious war. They will be solved by governance reforms, by climate adaptation, by economic opportunity, by accountability for perpetrators, by political leadership that builds bridges instead of walls. But all that is complex, long-term, unglamorous set of solutions, much less compelling than Christians are being persecuted and America must act. This doesn't raise funds. It's not sexy. However, the numbers don't lie. Let's return to these statistics because they are being used to make the case for intervention, and we need to understand exactly what they represent. When advocacy organizations claim 50,000 or 100,000 Christians have been killed since 2009, they are using a methodology that counts virtually all violence in Christian majority areas as anti-Christian persecution. And here's how that works. Nigeria's middle belt states like Benue, Plateau, Nasarawa, Taraba are predominantly Christian. When farmer herder violence occurs there, most victims are Christian because most farmers in those areas are Christians. So if armed herders attack a village, kill, let's say 15 people, and burn homes, advocacy groups code that as 15 Christians killed by Muslim extremists. But was it religious persecution? Or was it a land dispute where the religious identities of the parties happened to be Christian farmers and Muslim herders? Same question goes for bandit attacks. If bandits raid a Christian village in Zamfara state and kidnap 30 people for ransom, advocacy groups may count that as religious persecution, even if the bandits also raided a Muslim village the same week. This other organization, ACLED, uses a different approach. They code an attack as religiously motivated only if the perpetrators explicitly targeted victims based on faith. The attack occurred in a religious context, like bombing a church during mass or attacking a mosque during prayer, and reliable reports indicate a religious identity was the primary motivation. This means ACLED's numbers are lower but more precise. When ACLED says 317 Christians were killed in religiously motivated attacks between January 2020 and September 2025, they are saying these are deaths where we can verify that religion was the motivation. But when advocacy group says 7,000 Christians were killed in the first 220 days of 2025, what they are saying is that these are deaths of people who happen to be Christian in a country experiencing massive violence. Both statements can be true, but they mean different things. And this is what I want you to take away from this video. And the difference matters for the genocide claim, because if you are arguing that Christians are being systematically exterminated because of their faith, you need evidence that faith and not land, not resources, not criminality is the primary motivation. The ACLE data we looked at suggests that is not the case for vast majority of deaths. This doesn't diminish the suffering. Every death is a tragedy. Every displaced family deserves justice. But it does undermine the narrative being sold in Washington. The narrative that says this is a war on Christians that requires American intervention. Because the data says this is a complex crisis with multiple causes where both Christians and Muslims are dying. And simplifying it to a religious war obscures more than it reveals. So what is the reality? When bandits attack a Muslim village in Zamfara state and a Christian village in Benue state the same week, it's the same criminal enterprise, the same profit motive, the same lawlessness. They know that they are operating in a failed state where violence pays and accountability doesn't exist. And the solution, if there is one, requires understanding that complexity. But like I said earlier, complexity doesn't mobilize political action. Complexity doesn't generate fundraising appeals. Complexity doesn't justify intervention. So the complexity gets stripped away and what remains is a simple story. Good versus evil, Christian versus Muslim, persecution that demands American intervention. Which brings us back to the question we asked at the beginning. This violence has existed for 15 years. Boko Haram emerged in 2009. The massacres began over a decade ago. The international community has known about this crisis for so long. So why now? Why did September 2025 mark the moment when Nigeria suddenly became the focus of American political attention? Why did Bill Maher, of all people, an atheist comedian with no particular interest in international religious freedom, devote airtime to Nigerian Christians? Why did Senator Ted Cruz introduce legislation? Why did 30 Christian leaders write to President Trump? And why did Fox News start covering Nigerian massacres? The answer you will find is not in Nigeria, it's in Washington.
They need to pray. They need to be a voice for the voiceless. They need to be a voice for our persecuted brothers and sisters.
All of a sudden, Senator Ted Cruz introduces legislation. Congressman Riley Moore appears on Fox and Friends. Nina Shear of the Hudson Institute organizes a letter signed by 30 Christian leaders. Tony Perkins of the Family Research Council testifies before Congress. Open Doors International launches a campaign. International Christian Concern publishes reports. Genocide Watch issues statements. Heritage Foundation hosts conferences, all within weeks, all saying the same thing, all using the same statistics, all calling for the same response. This is far from coincidence. This is coordination. And behind it all lies a network of players, politicians, think tanks, advocacy organizations who have been building toward this moment for over a decade. Some are motivated by genuine concern for persecuted Christians. Their faith compels them to act. Others see this as an opportunity to advance geopolitical interest, to secure resources, to expand influence, to profit from conflict. Nigeria is not just a humanitarian crisis, it is a strategic prize. Africa's most populous nation, its largest economy, vast oil reserves, critical minerals essential for the global energy transition, a linchpin in West African stability, and increasingly a battleground in the competition between the United States and China. The people pushing for American intervention aren't just some religious freedom advocates. They are defense contractors who profit from weapons sales and training programs. They are oil companies protecting billions in investments. They are private military contractors looking for the next conflict zone to operate in. And they are politicians positioning themselves with evangelical voters. They are think tanks funded by conservative philanthropies, all advancing ideological agendas. And at the center of it all, waiting in the wings with proposal, is one of the most controversial figures in modern military history, Eric Prince, founder of Blackwater, the private military company that became synonymous with contractor abuses in Iraq. The man behind the Nisour Square massacre, where 17 Iraqi civilians were killed, a crime for which President Trump pardoned the convicted contractors. Prince has been eyeing Nigeria for over a decade. In 2014, he allegedly met with then Nigeria's president and proposed a $1.5 billion mercenary operation to fight Boko Haram. Yeah, allegedly. The proposal was reportedly declined, but Prince didn't give up. Prince has repeatedly proposed contractor-led solutions in other theaters. Example, Afghanistan. He speaks publicly about Nigeria's oil theft problem. He advocates for private military solutions, and in October 2025, he made an appeal for funding to deploy private contractors to protect Nigerian Christians. The mercenary is cycling. The narrative is built for him, and the political infrastructure is well in place. All that is missing is the green light. While the violence in Nigeria is real, the suffering is immense, the need for solution is urgent. The story being told, however, the narrative of Christian genocide requiring American intervention is not the whole truth. It is a carefully constructed framework designed to serve particular interests that have little to do with protecting Nigerian lives. That is the truth. And if history is any guide, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Somalia, what comes next won't save Nigeria. It will destroy it. But who stands to gain from such an operation?
I was told that my wife tried escaping with one of her children, but she was shot in front of the door, which is where she fell. They butchered her. So when I came in the morning, I only identified her from a piece of clothing as she was completely burnt. I picked her and the child that was with her and went to bury them. I couldn't find the other 3 children because so many children were burnt beyond recognition.